I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the PDC Chief Executive, Matt Porter. Thanks again for the time, Matt. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks, Alex. Yeah, always a pleasure.
Now, we've got some listener questions coming up later, but we last had you on just before the World Matchplay, and obviously we've had a lot of events behind closed doors since then. But what was the general feeling like after those 9 days in Milton Keynes, the first big one that you put on?
Yeah, I think it's obviously been a learning curve for everybody and a massive cultural change that we've had to undergo over the last 12 months or so. Staging the events behind closed doors is not ideal, not something we particularly want to do, but we've been forced into it by virtue of the circumstances. And I think we've probably done it as well as we could have done, to be brutally honest. There's always little bits and pieces that you can do differently, but we've kept to our schedule. We've delivered the entertainment to the people watching on TV via the players who, to be frank, a lot of them have really stepped up to the plate, because it could have been an excuse for people to care less or try less hard or practice less or whatever, but you've only got to see from the standard that the players have been playing at that hasn't been the case. So, I think overall we've coped with the situation as best as we could have done.
Did get some crowds during last year, during the pandemic. Of course, we had some limited crowds across Europe. There was a lot of talk in the build-up to the World Championship. Could we potentially see it moved to Germany or Austria? And of course, they had similar restrictions in the end anyway, but was that ever considered?
No, it wasn't, to be honest with you. No, it was important for us to stage the World Championship at Alexandra Palace. I know we've managed to, we had to move some of the other events to the bubbles at Coventry or Milton Keynes, but it was the World Championship belongs at Alexandra Palace, and that was important to us. And of course, because we did have that crowd in on the first night, and it was only a couple of days beforehand that we found out we wouldn't be able to have crowds on other nights. At that time, it was an obvious move, but no, moving it overseas was never something we looked at.
Speaking of the world events, Scott mentioned the World Cup as well. We had some good debuts for Portugal and Latvia. China and Hong Kong unfortunately having to pull out. We've got more teams coming to the fore now. Do you think that could mean maybe an increase in teams or a qualifier? What are you guys thinking after that World Cup we had?
You've always got to be mindful of schedules, and yeah, there are more countries playing darts to a good standard, but that doesn't mean that you just put them all in the World Cup just because they're playing better. We need to get to the point where each country hasn't just got automatic picks of two players who play every year because they're the only two players there are. We need to get to the point where each country is competitive, and we'll keep working on that through our global affiliates to develop darts regionally around the world. But in terms of expanding the World Cup beyond 32 nations, that isn't really something that we're likely to look at in the short term. For scheduling reasons, as I say, it fits in nicely. And what you don't want to do is dilute it too much or put people in necessarily before they're ready. Doesn't really help them. We've seen some countries in there maybe 3 or 4 times and don't get close to winning a game. Not great. It's better if the standards improve locally, and then when they come into the equation, they're more equipped to compete.
We touched on the World Championships. That was a few months ago now, and a lot of close games. We had the different rule with the tie-break. What was the general feedback that you guys got and the PDC got with how the World Championship went?
Again, we were as pleased with it as we could have been under the circumstances. It was obviously the rug was pulled from beneath us up with no crowd after the first night, but those 500 or so people who were in on that first day really enjoyed themselves and followed the rules. So it was a shame we couldn't continue with that over the Christmas period, but I understand the reasons behind that. And the players were great. They stuck to the rules. They understood what the circumstances under which the tournament was allowed to be played, and they delivered. Gerwyn Price was a fantastic winner. He's a great ambassador for darts. He looks the part. He plays to a great standard, and I think it's fair to say his popularity is improving, which is justified because he's not the villain that people paint him out to be, and he's a worthy world champion. Anyone who can cross over into a second professional sport is worthy of praise, but to go on and then take it to the level of world champion is phenomenal.
We don't often ask for opinions on individual players, but I've got to ask you about Michael van Gerwen. We wouldn't bet against him being number one again, but 7 years straight at the top, flying the flag, the ambassador for the PDC. I just wanted to give you the opportunity really to say anything about Michael and what he's done during the last 7 years.
Well, Michael's been a tremendous ambassador. He's a consummate professional, not only the way he plays, but the way he conducts himself, his media commitments, his sponsor commitments. He's very professional. He's obviously had a rougher year than he would have liked. And maybe some of that's due to the pandemic. You'd have to ask him that. Some players have obviously dealt with it better than others or found it easier to cope with than others. But that's for Michael to answer. There's no doubt that the talent that he's got and the dedication he's got as well, that he'll be back at the top though.
Last 12 months, as far as getting to different countries, spreading the gospel of darts, as Barry Hearn likes to put it, it's been difficult. But we have had Belgium and Portugal first-time major winners in the PDC. Just recently, Russia and American players winning tour cards at Q School. What are those potential markets like, do you think, going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a massive plus for us, the fact that we've still got that global pull, and fair play to players who've overcome significant travel difficulties to attend events as well. But it's all part of the big plan, you know, what we maybe started 10 years or so ago, working with different associations around the world and developing that. You know, we've got tour card holders, I think, from 28 countries now. And, you know, it does make me laugh when I sometimes hear about people from the UK complaining about having to go to Germany to play Pro Tour events or whatever, and you think, well, we should just do everything in the UK and just stay UK sport forever. This is going to be a global sport. So, you know, we want to be like tennis and golf with tournaments all around the world, and fair play, if people don't want to travel, they don't have to. But, you know, the likes of players from Australia, Russia, Portugal, Belgium, wherever, they're flying the flag now, and they're setting a trail for others to follow in their home countries.
Great to hear. Well, we have got the tour back up and running now. Just before that, we had Q School and we had Graham Fairhurst on the show explaining that a lot of the new format was down to the virus, keeping the numbers low. But a few weeks on, how did the PDC feel it went? What was the player feedback like, and is that format here to stay?
I think the idea of an initial stage and a second stage was something we wanted to implement anyway, and it did help keeping the numbers down. Whether there's a need to split the first stage or not is something we need to decide. That was obviously necessary this year because of numbers, but I certainly think the idea of exemptions to the second stage, depending on things you've achieved, you know, ultimately you fall off the tour, or you perform well but not quite well enough on the development tour or the challenge tour. That probably puts you at a different bracket to somebody who's just trying for the first time. Might not mean they're not as good a player as you, by the way, but perhaps because of what you've achieved previously in darts, you deserve a slightly different status. So I think the idea of exemptions through to a final stage is something that works, and I think it helped us to manage Q School in a more time efficient manner this year. Even though it obviously took 10 days instead of 4, the actual days themselves were more manageable, and it wasn't like players were being asked to start at 9 o'clock in the morning and finish at 9 o'clock at night or whatever. So it's something that I think the first and final stage will stay, but whether it's exactly the same as it was this year with the 1A and 1B, assuming there's no COVID, then I don't know that yet.
Just sticking with Q School for a second, there was a lot of talk on Twitter as well about the points allocations for the Order of Merit. Hang on,
there wasn't a lot of talk on Twitter. There was a few people having a chat about it for a while who didn't understand what was going on. But yeah, go on.
Well, on our timeline anyway. But one idea I suggested was maybe the final stage, you put it up to 144, 160 players. You've got that prelim, then the last 128, that's when the points start. What's your thoughts on that?
I think if I was a player and I qualified for the last stage and then I was asked to play a prelim, I'd be pretty disappointed.
Well, another format that's changed. Let's talk about the Masters then. We've got it up to 24 players. You can't commit every year to having a Premier League spot on the line, but top 24 rather than top 16, is that something you're hopeful of keeping?
Yeah, I think so. You know, it didn't hurt the event. It gave more people an opportunity after the World Championship. World Championship kept more people, in with a chance of appearing at it during the World Championship, even though it wasn't known at the time. You know, we were aware that we were likely to increase the event, so I don't think there was a downside to doing it. And obviously, with Johnny and Mervyn getting to the final, it showed that the strength in depth is there to justify it.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd be happy to see it stay for 2022. And looking back, the perfect ending, as you mentioned there, 2 players not in the Premier League getting to the final. Had it been a going price Peter Wright final, would that spot have held over to the UK Open before you decided who got it?
Possibly. I think it all depends how it had panned out. You know, if it had been 8 Premier League players in the quarterfinals and you had no obvious candidate, then potentially, we made the decision for it to be Johnny or Mervyn almost instantaneously. You know, during the semi-finals it was discussed, and then we decided that there was a lot of players who you could make a small case for. There wasn't anybody you could make a massive case for. So we thought, actually, if somebody's going to step up there and win a TV tournament, that's good enough for us. It's been the case in the past, you know, all the way back to Kevin Painter, who's just retired, for example, you know, but Jose de Souza, Dimitri Vandenberg in more recent times. So we took that decision, contrary to what some people who do think they know it all say on social media. Neither player knew beforehand. The only people who knew beforehand were a handful of people from the PDC side. Even a lot of our own staff didn't know, and the ITV production people who needed to know. And I think that added to a fantastic piece of drama.
Definitely did. Another debate you might not have seen on social media, talking about tour card holders missing events, and in fairness, not many have missed events during this time. I think we only had 7 missing last week.
Yeah.
I know, as you mentioned, an international field, a lot more different countries, but is there a particular number in mind? Like if you got down to maybe 100 players only turning up, you'd look into it, or at the moment are you happy with the entries you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, no, we're happy with the entries we're getting. People have got their own reasons for missing events at the moment, and you have to respect that. There's no rule that says you have to play. I think if you just qualify for a tour card and then you'd already made your mind up you weren't going to play because of COVID, that would be a little bit, unreasonable. But largely, people have got their own reasons that you have to respect at this time. We did say at the height of the pandemic, when we were getting back together for the summer series and the autumn series, if we got to a point where there was a certain critical mass of players who couldn't enter, or for example certain players, if for example everyone from the Netherlands wasn't allowed to play because of travel restrictions or something like that, then we'd have to look at whether that would be fair to still hold ranking events under those circumstances. Fortunately, that didn't happen. The players have all been provided with the appropriate paperwork by ourselves to enable them to travel internationally, and they've all managed to do so, without a glitch. There's been a few people been questioned, but that's all been dealt with, and everybody's been allowed to cross borders as they need to. I think we're probably coming to the point now, hopefully, where the system for people to travel internationally for work is a bit more defined, and I'd like to think that where we are now, that won't be an issue going forward.
Good to hear. Well, one of the big stories in the last month has been the comeback of Raymond van Barneveld, and what start it's been. He gets his tour card back. He's won an event as well. What has Barney's comeback done as far as interest in the PDC in the last month?
Yeah, I think it's stimulated a lot of interest from people who are big Barney fans, and were sorry to see him retire, I don't know, 15 months ago, whenever it was. So I think it's great for Raymond. Fair play to him to be able to come back and win a Pro Tour in your first week is remarkable achievement. Bearing in mind, I don't think he'd won one for 6 or 7 years before he retired. So that was, fantastic for him, and it shows that he obviously missed what he had before, and has got that appetite back. So that's good for him. It's good for darts in the Netherlands, and anything that's good for those two factors, it will be good for us too.
And that title came in Bolton, the Reebok, as it's fondly remembered, the first venue for the UK Open this weekend. Is going to be not in Minehead, behind closed doors in Milton Keynes. Was there a chance it could have been at Bolton, at that old venue this weekend?
No, the hotel's not big enough. No, I mean the big difference between, you have to think, we create these bubbles where everybody's in, everybody's tested, and nobody else is allowed in. There's 300 hotel rooms at Milton Keynes. There's only 120 at Coventry and 120 at Bolton. So we have to use second hotels there, and they're not massive either. They're like 50 or 60 rooms. So for the UK Open, with the ITV production staff, all the players, all the staff, we need the best part of 300 hotel rooms. So these decisions are made for practical reasons rather than, potentially anything sort of romantic about them.
Fair enough. Well, Dave Allen, of course, mentioned on Twitter that the UK Open is going to be back to the old layout of all 8 boards in the same room this weekend. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, there's nowhere else to put them. There's a great big arena at Milton Keynes with plenty of space in it, so all the boards will go in there, and that will look good. The way that we've done the layout with ITV, it will look good on TV, and the event will look. Will be good for people to watch. They'll be able to engage with what's happening around the room, and the reporters will bring people up to date and whatever. So no, I think that, again, these decisions are made for practical reasons. We needed, it's an 8-board event with a big stage and a little stage and 6 sort of cubicles. So well, not cubicles, but cubicle size mini stages. So they have to go where they have to go, and you have to get cables to them and lights and all that sort of thing. So that big arena that we staged the Masters in, and we staged the behind closed doors events in, that's adequate for this.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing it. And looking ahead, last week we had some hopeful news from the government, the roadmap out of lockdown, the restrictions being lifted. You've probably been asked this 1,000 times since last week, but probably still not got a 100% clear plan. But what are the PDC aiming with those dates to get fans back in?
say, we haven't, we don't know yet. I think the legislation needs to be written up and we need to see the detail, but we are obviously hoping that by the time it means we get round to the World Matchplay in July, that we are going to be in a position to push the button to do things as normal. That's the hope. It will pan out over the next couple of months, and we'll be able to know which way we're going to go. But ultimately, as we sit here today on the 1st of March, we're hoping that the World Matchplay will be played under normal conditions in July.
Fingers crossed for that. Well, the PDC has got a lot of plaudits for the last 12 months, keeping darts in the public eye for the right reasons, well deserved as well. And one thing I've liked as well is you've always had something in the diary to look forward to. Since the summer series, there's always been something ahead to look forward to. Is that something that you felt has been important to keep darts going?
Yeah, it has, yeah. And I've had a couple of meetings this morning about our calendar for the second half of the year, but in many ways that's something that we can work out later. As you say, the important thing is to work out what we're going to do next. We've got to keep players in employment. We've got to keep fans entertained. We've got to keep sponsors and broadcasters, happy. So what we do next is of paramount importance. And obviously we've got the UK Open and then the Premier League. And then as and when the travel restrictions change and testing and bubbles and things like that, those restrictions at any given time in any given country are known, then we've got the ability to be flexible and rapid enough to change our situation to make sure we comply.
Well, we've got some listener questions to finish up with. The first one comes from Richard, who says, can you please convince Uncle Barry to do another doubles tournament on the calendar? Such a great format that's dreadfully underutilised.
I don't think it's about Barry. I don't think we're going to do any more doubles at the moment because it doesn't fit. It's not something that we can put into our ranking system. It's not something there's a particular demand for from broadcasters or sponsors. We do a lot of darts. We've got a lot of televised content. We've got a lot of tour content. We've got a lot of European tour events. We're not just going to do events just for the sake of it. Everything has to fit into the structure. And I don't really know where a pairs or a doubles or whatever you want to call it event would fit into that at the moment. I agree it brings its own level of excitement, and that's one of the reasons why I like the doubles so much at the World Cup, because the pressure and the drama, of letting your teammate down. To be honest, anybody can win, but to lose, to be the one who misses, is brutal. So I don't disagree in the slightest about how exciting it can be as a format, although it can take a long time. But it's got to have a place within the structure.
Just off the back of that then, you mentioned the World Cup. There was a lot of talk about the lack of doubles, I guess, with a lot of games that went one-sided. Is that something that you may be looking into changing the format for the World Cup? So there is more doubles
Not
guaranteed?
Necessarily, no. I mean, the only thing I'd want to see is more close games. But, again, the pressure there of playing on your own and your partner's backstage and watching, that makes for good TV. And it, it works in the Davis Cup, it works in the Ryder Cup. There's no reason why it shouldn't work in the Darts World Cup. And I actually think it does. That just doing doubles constantly, wouldn't, I don't think, give you that same degree of drama and variety that we get in the current format. So the World Cup format's changed a few times over the years, and I'm not saying it won't do again, but I don't think there's a pressing need to turn it to all doubles straight away.
Next one comes from Dyson Prody, a player that we know well. Due to the pandemic, can players register for the Challenge Tour that missed Q School? Players like himself could not travel due to COVID-19. Will he be able to enter the Challenge Tour this year?
No, I mean, Dyson should know. If he wants to ask us a question, then he should go through his Players Association. But no, we appreciate that it was difficult circumstances. But ultimately, if we don't have a rule about how you can enter the Challenge Tour, then we will end up with a chaotic situation where people will have all sorts of different reasons why they didn't go to Q School, and you just start to open a can of worms. So it might be unfortunate for 1 year, and I'm not saying that it's 100% right, but in these times people have to understand that we have to be flexible and we have to keep moving things forward and keep things going. So we're not going to rewrite the rule book left, right and centre on everything, and it's unfortunate if people couldn't travel to Q School, although many players did manage to travel to Q School from overseas, whether the German one or even in some cases the UK one. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but the rule is there.
Just sticking with the Challenge Tour, Jimmy asks, do you have any idea when the first Challenge Tour weekend will be and where this year?
It will be as soon as we're allowed it to be played. There's only elite sport is allowed to be played at the moment, and it doesn't quite necessarily fit under the criteria of that as things stand. So that's something we're looking at. We have committed to staging 8 Challenge Tour events by the end of June if we're allowed, and if we're allowed we will do that, but if not then we will do them as quickly as we can and try to make up as many as we can in the second half of the year. So I'm afraid that might be a short notice kind of answer rather than a longer range one.
2 more before we let you go. Our producer Hannah says, could we see at least 2 women's series this year? And she's saying, can we beg for those as well?
You don't need to beg. I mean, hopefully we can do more women's series events. Again, question mark over the elite sport definition at the moment. As you say, we've only got professional, in inverted commas, events staged at the moment. Or scheduled at the moment, but that doesn't mean we haven't got the intention to do more women's series events, same as Challenge Tour, just as soon as we're able to.
Last one for you comes from Sean. He says, which has been the hardest decision to make over the past 12 months?
That's a really good question. The hardest decision to make over the last 12 months? I don't know. There's been a lot. I mean, it's not so much been a decision to make, it's been the work that's had to go into it. It was hard to get permission to, get crowds in at some of the events in Germany and then in the UK, the World Championship specifically, obviously. Probably the hardest one was to take the World Matchplay away from Blackpool. But I think it had to be done for necessary reasons. Every decision that we've made or that I've had to make has been for a reason. It's not been. They've all been forced on us. So it's a really good question. It stumped me a bit. So I'm not sure if anything was a hard decision to make because it was all kind of easy to make because you had to make it. But that didn't mean that the work that went around it wasn't difficult. If that makes sense.
No, of course, and we've all got our fingers crossed that the World Matchplay will be back in Blackpool this year. And
let's hope so.
We wish you all the best for this year. Wish you the best for the UK Open this weekend. Keep up the great work that you and the team are doing at the PDC, and we always appreciate your time.